Everybody, I'm Meredith, and welcome to our monthly program that we do here at the Brahma Kumari Center. Well, we're not actually at the center, as you know. Most people aren't wherever they're supposed to be usually. But tonight we are having a very, very special guest who was with us a month ago. And we're going to be talking about something that might sound a little bit like, what exactly does that mean? But we're going to talk about it and explain how it can be of great help today in dealing emotionally and psychologically with what we're all experiencing in the world. But of course, there are people that are experiencing it even on a much deeper level. It's called Transformational Resilience. And again, joining me, I was with her last month, is Dr. Carissa Caban-Aleman, who's a Miami psychiatrist who deeply believes that meditation can be a powerful tool in the healing process. And she's been working with people from different segments of life, whether it's the homeless, whether it's the people in Puerto Rico who have gone through tremendous tragedy over the last few years, and has a lot to say and also has a lot to explain about how some of these things that she's involved with work. And Dr. Caban, I can call her just Dr. Caban, right, is medical director for behavioral health at Florida International University Student Health Services and assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Health at the FIU College of Medicine. And that is quite a title, quite a lot of titles, Carissa, and it's great to have you back. I want to say, though, before we get going, before I get too involved with you and I forget, that we really want people to text, write in, and with questions, and you are here tonight to be able to respond to the work that you're doing with mental health and emotional health. And so all they have to do is text in, and Dr. Kathy Shea will be joining us later with these questions. She'll be giving these questions out. So we'll say that again later, right? But that'll be where the questions will be given at 7. But right now, start texting in your questions if you do have any for Dr. Caban. And I had just seen something on television, I think it was on CNN recently, I think, that said that this is no longer, just, of course, we realize the epidemic is just, on a world level of, affecting the entire world. But what also is getting a bit scary is that the pandemic is actually affecting us so emotionally that it's becoming or emotionally, psychologically, all of that it's becoming a mental health crisis. And it's the result of the isolation, the fear, everything that's, going on, how people are suffering with loss of jobs and everything. So I wanted you to maybe just start out and address that before we get into some of the amazing work that you're doing.
Okay. Hi, good evening, everybody. Before I answer Meredith's question, I just want to thank you for tuning in. I hope that everybody that's watching this video is doing okay. And I also want to disclose that today I'm going to share my views based on my professional experience, but more on a personal note, not representing FIU or any of the formal roles that I have in my job. So I just wanted to start with that. In terms of analyzing the consequences of the situation that we have with the virus impacting on a global scale, it is expected clinically and evidence-based speaking to think about all of the consequences that this can have on the mental health of people, right? Because it's a situation that causes a great deal of uncertainty, and it's very distressing to think about all of the possible risks of the virus, all of the inequities in how it's been handled in terms of access to care and treatment, and the difficulties that officials and public agencies and that have to take care of everything have with not knowing much about how to address an illness that is new, right? So obviously it is expected that with any crisis or any challenge that is on a community level, this could probably have a big toll on mental health. And I think that I prefer that people are aware of it. So I do appreciate in some way those kinds of reports. The only problem with that is sometimes when we hear so much about all of the consequences that something that is qualified as bad can cause, sometimes that actually increases the level of overwhelming feeling that we get, right? So it's good to be aware of something, but in the process, I think it's important for us to figure out what we can do about it, right? So this is actually Mental Health Awareness Month. That's why we have the hashtag in the flyer and the promotion for today. Now more than ever, right? And it's really important to be aware of all of the consequences that this can have on our mental and spiritual, the mental and spiritual aspects of our identity and who we are, and also that it disproportionately affects certain populations. For example, people that have significant mental illness, it can be a lot harder for them to deal with the situations of being in isolation or not having access to proper hygiene or to secure access of food, for example. So considering the needs of populations that maybe have a little bit of more limitations on doing everything they can to stay away from being ill is very important.
Well, let's take an example. I mean, I don't want to say everyday depression, but there's always been depression, even, in good times, people suffer from depression. But what I'm thinking about is that it could be something that, because this whole thing is so intense and we just can't really get away from it no matter what, I mean, just all that's going on in the world, that the depression could really increase and maybe get to a point that the person has no control over their life. And then it could lead to suicide or, heavy things like that. So that's what I was thinking. Is that possible that could be happening now to people who perhaps weren't really experiencing these kinds of forms of mental health problems in the past?
Well, when we think about how the mind works, it's a complicated process that is very unique to every individual, every community, and also involves systemic factors, right? So I don't think that it's something that we can literally say people are going to get suicidal and not have control because of the pandemic. But when some persons are already struggling with a lot of other factors that put them at a higher risk to develop mental illness, that's mostly the most common scene where you would be more concerned as a provider or a clinician that takes care of people with an incidence of mental illness, right? For example, if you have a lot of other stressful factors that person is going through, or for example, the most predictive factor, if we're thinking about suicidal ideation, which is a prior suicidal attempt, when we consider all of those factors, then for some people, we will have to be more concerned and more vigilant and give them more support for any crisis. This is now the most hot topic or the most thought about example, but for example, I do a lot of academic work with the impact of climate change on mental health. And it's a very similar situation that we can think about when we are seeing the consequences of environmental disasters. As a matter of fact, I wanted to quickly show you a diagram that describes the most common consequences of a crisis of this type, both for the pandemic, but this is research that comes for environmental disasters more than anything else.
Well, let me just say one thing. So this is very interesting because what you're talking about here has to do with something that can be used to deal with what we're dealing with emotionally and psychologically with, what's happening with this epidemic, right? But it's been used with environmental. That's the point, right?
Well, yeah, when you see the diagram that I'm showing right now, I just wanted to briefly show whoever is watching the most common psychological and behavioral consequences that people go through in disasters. The red circle is the biggest one, and it's very common distress responses that might not necessarily convert into a chronic or persistent mental illness. Sometimes people do develop mental illnesses. The most common one that has been studied for crises and disasters is post-traumatic stress disorder. It's also very common with any traumatic situation, such as active duty in a war or sexual violence, et cetera, But not everybody, just because they're having a lot of stress with an environmental disaster or a pandemic, are going to develop a mental illness. So the most common distress responses, a lot of people that are hearing this, and maybe both of us have had some of these, which are temporary changes in sleep, just feeling not so safe as we did before, getting a little bit more distracted or irritable, avoiding certain things, or being a little bit more isolated. As a matter of fact, I do see some patients that already felt like a sense of wanting to isolate a little bit more. And, the opportunity of the quarantine has been a little bit somewhat even relieving for them, because they felt like they needed the space to sort of process all the information that they were getting, deal with all of the changes that the pandemic has caused. And ironically, the ability to stay at home, if they do have the privilege to have a home, right? Not all patients have a home. That has been a sense of sort of comfort, and not all people with mental illness are just going to be in distress and doing worse just because there's a hard situation that's going on. Sometimes, also people that have already endured trauma and difficult situations have learned from that, which is basically the gist of transformational resilience, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And they sometimes develop a lot of more resilience than if they haven't gone through any significant traumatic change in their lives. So even if they have mental illness, not everybody is completely vulnerable just because of having mental illness. Sometimes that becomes a strength and an asset to deal with this kind of crises.
Dr. Caban, I hear this over and over again, and I'm sure we all do, people saying, oh, my life is no longer normal. It's not, the way it used to be. And I can't, we've never faced anything like this. I hear it. And sometimes with some people, it's just a statement, but with others, I get the feeling that there's some suffering going on because they can't do the things they normally were able to do, and also that it's going on for so long. It isn't like like we've had hurricanes here in Miami, and they come and they go and they're gone, and then of course the people that have been really affected are left to deal with the whole everything afterward. But this is something that is just continuing this not normal life. Now, is that something that has an effect on people's mental, emotional well-being, or do you not consider that a form of
yes, it's definite. Any dealing with change is not easy for a lot of, I would say for most human beings, right? But it is what makes us grow. It is a fundamental necessity for us to deal with changes and challenges, to learn from them. And it's one of the things that you can cultivate and get better at through meditation, which I'm sure we'll touch on that subject in a few minutes.
Definitely. But now, why don't we just tell people to send in their questions for you? Sure. Anything to do with transformational resilience or emotional, mental problems that they're dealing with or their families are dealing with, and that we will address them. You will address them later in the program.
Sure.
Okay.
So it's just to continue to answer your question. I do think that it could be a great source of distress that when we are going through changes, sometimes it makes us feel really uncomfortable to not be in the normal mode, right? But and that is something that in therapy, I just wanted to clarify, in therapy and in treatment, we need to acknowledge that and accept it and help the patient just be aware of it. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no right way to act or to feel or to behave when we're going through difficult situations. And it's very important for us to have empathy and to just, accompany others in the process of working through something hard in order to help them through the process of learning from it and recovering and getting adjusted to the situation that they have to adjust to. And, in terms of the going back to normal, some people desperately want that because maybe the normal that they had was what they knew, what they felt comfortable with, or perhaps it was working very well for them. There is a comment on the flyer for today's lecture about a comment that I made for another lecture that we had with, not a lecture, a workshop that we had with a brother of the Brahma Kumaris organization last weekend, where I said something like, it's important to recognize that it's not necessarily going to be good or healthy to just go back to normal. Because if we think about some of the systemic or social issues that are around how the virus and the consequences of the virus are being addressed, there are a lot of situations with lack of access to care, with inequity or with social injustice that are going on that affect the chances that a person has to get proper care, the fastness and the efficacy of the response of government and public health institutions to act on everything that has to be done, right? So if we just go back to normal, we are not necessarily going to be able to learn from this pandemic and to address all of these little things that we have to really analyze and reflect on to avoid doing those mistakes again in the future. And that's where the word transformation comes in, right? It's not going to be necessarily healthy to just go back to what was there just because we felt comfortable with it. How can we learn from this uncomfortable experience to have more resources and more capacity, both emotionally, socially, and systemically, to be more ready for the next crisis, which unfortunately a lot of scientists predict that we'll have to deal a lot more with as climate change, for example, advances, and as we deal with other issues that are more social and political.
Well, we like to hope that nothing else is going to happen, but I guess we do really all know in our hearts that things don't stop, do they? I mean, hopefully, but we need to be, as you're saying, prepared emotionally.
It's never perfect,
physically.
right? We have challenges.
Yeah. I know people are feeling now, I don't need these challenges, right? But we all have to face it as a community, as a world, as an individual, which I think is a good way maybe to tie it in right now, or, in terms of this transformational resilience and how it is a different model for helping people to heal through what they've been through.
Yes, so I just wanted to also, I'm not going to have time to go over the rest of the other slide, which is basically about the stress responses that we see commonly, but maybe on another time we can focus more on the tangible consequences of something like a pandemic, and then how do we address them a little bit more clinically. So we just wanted to focus today on the framework of transformational resilience. Let me share my screen again, 1 second. Okay. All right, hopefully you can see that.
There it is. Okay. I see it.
So this is not like a way of therapy or a treatment modality. It's basically a theoretical framework that has been developed by a couple of clinicians and researchers based on different evidence-based models and studies that have been done with different situations, primarily addressing climate change impacts, right? And mostly from projects that have been done to address the mental health of people that have been affected by environmental disasters. And it's basically a prevention process that works on systems-based care, building on the existing strengths of that person, that community, or that population, or that country or state, to minimize the adverse consequences on the psychosocial and spiritual level before they happen. But sometimes, as we know, human beings are not perfect, and we end up learning from other crises that already happened, instead of just being prepared and doing it at a time where there's no problem going on, which is highly unlikely in most lives of human beings. And then it's a model that helps people use climate adversities, but in this case, this could be really implemented to address a pandemic. And actually, one of the persons that have written most about this is a colleague of mine that I am very lucky to know. His name is Bob Doppelt, and he's actually created a couple of documents and has started to present some workshops on how to use this model to address a pandemic. It's basically using the idea of helping people use this as a transformational catalyst to learn, grow, and increase, well-being. It's very important to consider, and this we could actually, I see the work of the Brahma Kumaris Meditation Center at Miami at the heart of what the last bullet talks about, because people sometimes think that meditation is just sitting alone in a room trying for us to relax and for our mind to just go blank and for us not to have any thoughts. But the act of sharing the knowledge and the experience that we get out of meditating and doing that in a communal level is actually this. I see it as a way of transformational resilience, but it's very important to share it. The process of growing as an individual, but within a community, right? So this is the most important factor in this theory for me. And it's basically thinking about how we can transform our systems, whatever that is, education, healthcare system, the systems of our families, of our own individual beings, to become socially resilient. And basically resilience is pressure divided by, resilience is just something that makes you more capable of dealing with stress, right? And to counteract the pressure that you're going through in life. So the socially word, basically what it adds is that we do it in a way where we're sharing and we're helping each other out. So that sense of empathy and being in it together, which amidst all of the chaos and all of the problems that people are going through, we can see that in the community. Some people are coming more together, which is something that I think this country desperately needs. You see people that are sharing in your neighborhoods more with kids running around a little more, if they have the privilege to have the chance to do that, right? And there's more support and more, I feel more energy than before for people that maybe have a more of a situation of privilege to really try to put themselves in the shoes of people that are really struggling and try to help them out and defend their rights and really advocate for what they need to keep food on the table. So that sense of growth and learning from this adversity is that Me Too We, based on reciprocity, inclusion, mutual respect, and sharing that transformation.
Do you think there is this feeling now, maybe more than ever before, that we all are connected and that we do have, I don't want to say an obligation, a responsibility to help others who are in need? Because that's what I'm feeling when I talk to people, not all people, but just this feeling like, what can I do? Not everyone knows what they can do, but I think they'll find it in time, hopefully not too long, but do you feel that that's what this is all about now?
Well, at the end of the day, we're all in our personal bubbles. I do a lot of activism. So that's totally the sense that I feel in my personal and professional life, because I work with groups that's what they're all about. Right. And also, I work in a field where we're supposed to be there to help other people. But I'm not really sure if people that are going through a lot of oppression and a lot of hardship, if they would feel the same way that we do. Right. So that's actually part of why I collaborate with efforts like this, because I think it's important for people to know that there's another possibility and that there are people that are genuinely trying to make this world better and to really, help others and be good persons. Right. So it's important to share that. I definitely do see it.
Well, you're definitely one of those people. I would call you psychiatrist / social activist, a person that's really here to help the world. And I just want to break in and ask you, when did you awaken to this idea that you could do more than maybe just see patients? Not that that's just, but see patients and work with people who do have different disorders, and you realized that you wanted to be part of helping the world. When did that happen?
So I'll answer that, but before I go on, I really want to emphasize that all of this stuff I can read on books, but in none of my 12 years studying after graduating high school and in all of the research papers and books that I've read, have I ever learned more about transformational resilience than really seeing the work being done and the efforts being done from people and communities that are really going through the impacts of, for example, climate change. So my work in the last couple of years outside of my job has been mostly helping people that really struggled after the Hurricane Maria that hit Puerto Rico in 2017. And even before that, with all of the difficulties that Puerto Rico has been going through socioeconomically and politically speaking. And to see people that have gone through such complex trauma, going through months of no electricity and water in their homes, or not even having a home, and really embodying and empowering that sense of building a community, helping all of the neighbors out in whatever way they can, and growing from that, really building a sense of togetherness. I have never learned much more than from them. So I wanted to emphasize that, because sometimes society gives so much importance to these titles, and I'm a psychiatrist and the MD and all of that, but that's why I really think that when we work on mental health and we work on these projects of transformational resilience, we really have to allow the people that are going through the hardship to really speak from what they've learned, and give them a place at the table, and channel their energies and their capacities to really make their voice be heard and to continue to help themselves become better and help their community. So just wanted to say that my inspiration, just to answer your question, came from, I think I had mentioned this when we first met in the other interview. I thought I was going to be a psychologist, but I have a family member that went through a mental illness breakdown, and she got help from both psychiatrists and psychologists. I wanted to understand how the medications and the neurological part of mental health worked. And so I decided to do it through the medical side of it. And so I just always wanted to do this. So I don't know where else the inspiration came from. I guess my parents, my mom is a big giver. She's a very humble person. And my dad is very involved with social issues and super loving of the planet. So I guess that's where the climate change interest part came on.
So you had some great influences, and I guess my question now is, okay, this sounds really incredible, and it sounds like this is what we need at this time. But are we seeing this, and how does this work in our community, in the world, because we do see so much, divisiveness, and I hate to say it, but a lot of anger, people against the government, people against people. I mean, there's a lot of, this friction going on because of fear and worry and not knowing. So how does something like this really get into the system to be able to help a lot of people?
That's a really tough question that I think everybody needs to really get together and build like creative ideas to counteract all of the opposing forces. And this is where more of my personal opinion comes on, right? There are a lot of human beings that unfortunately think that possessions and acquiring power and prestige and being recognized is what's going to make them feel happy. And that is unfortunately something that counteracts our nature of being peaceful, empathetic human beings, right? So we do have to be aware of that and not ignore it or be in denial. And then find creative ways to just really focus on bringing up the natural qualities of who we are as human beings and protecting our home, which is really struggling right now with all of the impacts that we've made within the industrial, the way that we live in right now in terms of, carbon emissions and so forth.
But I get the feeling, of course, you wouldn't be into this if, you wouldn't be into this in this big way and with so much commitment, that you do know that people do have the capability to change, don't they? And to heal and to somehow come out of suffering, even when they're really going through something pretty heavy.
You have to keep the hope. I've seen it multiple times. Unfortunately, when we get consumed by an excessive amount of information, which sometimes we can't even tell if it's reliable or not, and the information sometimes unpurposely is been given on a more negative than positive note, because that causes certain reactions. For example, I do believe that there's a purposeful agenda from a lot of people to really sort of like make us be in a state of fear by the amount of negative news and framing things in a very exaggerated way. Not always exaggerated, but I think fear paralyzes. And unfortunately, there are some people that want common people to be paralyzed. So I am aware of that, but on the other side, doing community work and being a community psychiatrist, I see a lot of good. And I think that can be minimized, right? And a lot of people are not aware enough of what's happening, that we are sometimes even sort of told to like live our own lives and like work for our own success. And we are just focused on our to-dos and being very busy and like just focusing on the wellness of our families. And we sometimes are just not aware of things that are happening around us, or we unfortunately sometimes focus on the negative things. So if we can work with increasing our perspective and being capable of appreciating the good things, sometimes our eyes open a little bit more to the positive things that are going on. But that's easier said than done. It depends on a lot of factors.
Sure. But it's interesting you're saying, people have all been caught up. We've all been caught up, busyness and success and doing. And, we've been a society, at least in America, I don't know, I can't speak for the entire world, but of doers, and not, as Wayne Dyer used to say, people who just are being. But now This has forced us, whether we want or not, to be more than do, really, right?
Yes. I just saw the watch and I saw the clock and I saw that we have 1 minute, but I quickly wanted to share something very quickly.
Timekeeper, yeah.
Sorry.
That's good.
Because it's exactly about what you just said. And it's part of this, again, transformational model. And it's that this was something that Dr. Doppel presented in a lecture that I was seeing the other day. And it's just about what you said. Unfortunately, for many reasons, we are sort of trained, or we're raised in a way where we're always looking for results and what actions can get us to those results. And that is usually at very superficial, upper level, but below the iceberg, you see the top of the iceberg, but most of the icebergs are usually underwater, right? There comes a set of beliefs and experiences that make you go through certain actions that you think are going to get you to those results. that's like that paradigm level, right, that we need to work on. And that is exactly what I think that I've been, the technique that I've learned in my life so far that has worked the best for me to be able to really be more conscious about maybe negative or not helpful beliefs that have come from my experiences that are not helping me to get to those actions that will lead me to the results that I really want. The way for me to do that has been through daily meditation, even for a few minutes. So that's why I am cooperating with the meditation center and just suggesting and encouraging all the people I know to try to like start considering the possibility of learning a little bit about it. And also that sense of channeling positive energy for your own self, but for the people around you and the world, that is so needed. That idea of transformation through channeling positive energy to lead to change is really powerful. And I've also seen it implemented in different communities in Puerto Rico. That has been very healing for them. So just wanted to end with that note.
Thank you so much. And that, I think that's exactly the whole point of what we're talking about. We all need to heal from this and from many other things that we've perhaps been through in our lives. And it's our hope, maybe, you know, that this is the time for healing out of all of this, you know, the suffering and the things that are going on. And as you said, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, meditation is a good way to make it happen, you know, to heal quicker and with more, not so much struggle. And I thank you so much for being here again tonight.
Thank you.
And you will continue. I will be watching. Dr. Kathy Shea is going to be joining us now, and she is a program evaluator in behavioral health. She's going to be giving some of your questions if you receive the questions. And she's also a regular meditator, very committed meditator and teacher at the Brahma Kumaris Meditation Center. So, Dr. Kathy, yes.
Thank you, Meredith.
You're on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, very loud and clear.
Good. Thank you so much. Carissa, thank you very much too. I wanted to follow up on a couple of things that you said. And one of them was the distress response. Everybody talks about PTSD and the stress response, but that's the first time I've heard anyone talk about the de-stress or distress response. Can you say a little bit more about that? And I think you said it's normal.
Okay, so that's a great question. Thank you, Kathy. You know, I personally, I am not a fan of the term normal, because who is normal, right? We have to go from a perfect norm of a human being and a perfect mind, right? So I always start with that when I start working with a patient, because that creates sometimes a lot of concern. Am I normal? Can I be normal? And it sometimes ends up causing more difficulty for people to really just focus on what they can do to just function better, right? But I get your point, and yes, of course, it is very hard for most human beings to just remain perfectly grounded and perfectly calm and stress-free throughout a difficult situation or just any change. So I do think that from what people would say that is normal, then we could think about this being distress. I mean distress in the sense of like very common reactions that we might have, like temporary sleep changes or in terms of our muscles, or just some mild appetite changes or things like that. Yes.
Yeah, the first, I've been talking to people, and I noticed that for the first couple of weeks, there was this high adrenaline as everybody started to work from home and switch to online and homeschool kids and family members. And so there was this sort of high anxiety, I guess I would say. And now as we settle into what's basically the second month of this, and we're thinking about reopening, it sounds like a lot of people are having these distress reactions, for whatever you might want to call them. So what kinds of things can we do to mitigate those?
You mean what? Can you give me maybe a more specific example about what would be a distress reaction that you're thinking of?
Well, there's massive worry about sending children back to school.
Okay, so yeah, I do think that, you know, there are a lot of when I try to give people some support, I try to work with what is their perspective already, where they're coming from, right? Because there are people that are really not worried about hygiene and are actually just wanting to send their kids back to school, but some people might be, quote unquote, terrified about, just having any exposure to the virus, right? So I try to analyze where that person is coming from, and then just trying to use some supportive statements that don't necessarily counteract what they're thinking, because sometimes that can put them sort of like in a defensive mode. If somebody has concerns about this, the exposure to the virus, I would say as a personal way of seeing this, that it's going to be really hard for us to always be completely not exposed to the virus, right? We would pretty much have to stop living. Coronaviruses have been around for a long time. This is a new type. And I know that the fact that a lot of people have ended up in the hospital very ill from symptoms that have been attributed to COVID, very scary thought, but the best that we can do is just try to follow the recommendations of reliable public health institutions, try to wash our hands as frequently as possible, and then use the protection that we can. Of course, if the parent feels compelled to wait a little bit longer or not send the kids to school, that's a personal decision that I wouldn't be capable, or it wouldn't be right for me to say you should or you shouldn't do that, right? So.
Okay, great, thank you. There was another question about, you mentioned we're living in our own personal bubbles, and we only see really what affects us primarily. But this situation, as you point out, has really exposed the cracks in our society. So we have a lot of work to do in that regard. How can we deal with our own unconscious, very subtle perceptions and assumptions about how things should be that might not acknowledge how others might be experiencing this?
That's a very good and difficult question, because it's also a personal journey. But I think that one of the interesting, although I understand this is a very difficult situation, one of the interesting things that come with crises is that they shake our capacity to just stay fixed in those bubbles. It's almost inevitable for most human beings during a crisis like disaster, environmental disasters, or the pandemic, to just continue to live on those mental models that were working before. So they pressure and force people to look at those inner beliefs, and sometimes it leads to really deep spiritual and mental change because of that. So it's like sort of a forced process, which can be very hard in the beginning, but sometimes it could be just what we needed. And sometimes people realize that after they lose a loved one, or they go through a hurricane. Like, for example, a lot of Puerto Ricans think that it was necessary for a lot of people in the population to wake up and advocate for themselves and fight for change, which they did last year, for example. So first of all, it takes interest, right? If you want to do that on a voluntary level, if you're not forced, because if you don't want to look outside that bubble, it's going to really be hard until something like like a pandemic or a hurricane forces you. So it's very interesting to analyze what good consequences can come out of crises. That thing about analyzing how things should be, well, I thought from your question, I thought of a project that I've been learning about, which is called Gaia, which you're aware of, which is basically an effort from researchers at MIT and a lot of other leaders and colleagues in the whole world. This is not from the medical field. It's more an effort to create a global model of social change. And it's basically, they do it by weeks, and they do meetings and conferences to just encourage people to go through a process, and they do solidarity circles every week. I'm actually in one of them. And it's basically the first half of the journey is just trying to really reflect on all of those paradigms and those beliefs that you have, and just become aware of them. And most of the models that they use are basically mindfulness and meditation. And that's something that a lot of people are naturally realizing, that they feel like they need to stop and pause and learn from. from this experience to be able to be more aware of how they're feeling and maybe what emotional bubbles they've been living in.
That's wonderful, Carissa. And you had that lovely little pyramid and talked about the iceberg. And I personally feel that the first step to addressing the cracks is to get under the water and to look at those beliefs, however unconscious, and to realize how we developed those, how we came to think about how things should be. And as you say, we've been shaken. So this is our opportunity on World Peace, third Sunday, World Peace Meditation, to go under, to go a little deeper and examine some of that, get out of our bubbles, take a deep dive, and enjoy a meditation and center ourselves in what really matters, who we are as spirits, as souls, beyond all of the circumstances. And I always think there are something like 27 million high school seniors who are missing their graduation this year, 27 million. And so how must they be feeling? How must they be feeling? So this is our opportunity to acknowledge that others may not be experiencing this the same way that we are. And someone said to me this week, we're all going through the same thing, but just some of us are sitting in a better room than others. So let's sit in meditation now, in our personal meditation rooms, in our own little bubble, and experience our own inner strength and our own inner peace, and then share that with our community and with the world. So we'll be back. We have 20 minutes of World Peace Meditation. Thank you.
Sit relaxed, let the mind be still, and let yourself step into your inner silence. I focus the energy of my thought, the center of my forehead. I, the point of light, a point of eternal peace. I go to my home, and in my home, I see, I feel the one who is the supreme source of life, the one who is eternally benevolent to all things. The one who is called the eternal truth, the eternal light. And as I come closer and closer, I begin to understand how this being is so pure and remains constantly positive, constantly true. The one who has the knowledge of this universe and of my life. The one who is the supreme source of truth. The one whose state of being knows no sorrow, nor gives any pain or sorrow to any other being. Being truth, the supreme being is in a constant state of freedom. And as I come closer and closer, I realize I too must become true. I'm inspired to become totally free free of all selfish desire. Because in this state of freedom, I recall, I remember my original purity. To be pure is to be real. To be pure is to be natural. The pure is never violent, can never give pain or suffering. The pure maintains the law of life, and the law of life is love. The Supreme Being is the source of love, unconditional love. In essence, my original quality is also of selfless love, but I had forgotten it. But as I come closer to the source, I begin to remember and I begin to experience that pure love once again. This is the love that accepts me. And in this acceptance, I am nurtured, I am healed, my heart opens, my heart begins to trust and to believe in life. Love, the supreme source, is love. A love that forgives, a love that gives, a love that allows me to be myself, allows me to be what I truly am. A love that does not interfere or possess. A love that gives space and growth. And as I sit here in silence with you, the supreme benevolent energy, I absorb your rays of love deep into myself. And as I absorb, I am given the courage to change. I am given the faith to believe in myself once again. Your rays of spiritual love make me feel confident that transformation and growth will be achieved. Your love gives me peace. I am at peace with myself. I am in harmony with myself, and I am learning through your love to be in harmony with others. There is no conflict. There is no pain. I'm free. Love gives me the contentment of knowing my true self, but also knowing you, the benevolent one. You never forget who you are. I forget. I forget my value. I forget to respect myself. I forget that all things are within me eternally. Your love helps me to remember. In this link of life, in yoga, of your purity and my original purity, your peace and my original peace, your love and my original love. You gently guide me back to myself. I have awoken. My consciousness is filled with positivity. My attitude is renewed with love and with understanding. Love and understanding.
Thank you very much for adding your piece to the world, to our community. Thank you, Carissa. And on behalf of Meredith and the Miami BK Meditation Center, we wish you a wonderful evening and ask you to like or share this video if you have friends or colleagues or family that you think might benefit from seeing it. Everything is archived. You'll see it on Facebook, or you can go to our YouTube channel. And best thing to do is to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And so you'll be automatically notified when new things are posted. So in the meantime, have a wonderful week ahead, and Om Shanti.